We live in a time when power is being exercised in new and alarming ways all around us. We are witnessing the destruction of political institutions and the rule of law, partly in response to a progressive regime that had its own authoritarian strains, all in the context of technological developments that make surveillance and control of large populations increasingly feasible. What does it mean to resist power in a small, everyday manner? To refuse its encroachments on our lives? I think the practice of philosophy in daily life is one of the most potent ways we can exercise our own autonomy and dignity in the face of forces that would leave us cowed, afraid, timid, and docile. 5 years ago, I posted a video on YouTube that discussed the work of Michel de Certeau, a French social theorist who developed a theory of tactics as small everyday forms of resistance to the network of power that structures contemporary life. To my surprise, that video continues to be viewed consistently to this day. There is something fitting about the fact that this video on de Certeau has performed better than any of my other videos, because I still view his idea of everyday resistance as a core element of what I want to say in the world. I'm interested in philosophy as an everyday practice because I think it stands to offer us personal freedom under any circumstances. I also think that those who cultivate their own inner freedom will inevitably begin to act in ways that promote the freedom of others as well. But engaging in a philosophical life is hard work. It is best done alongside a community of like-minded friends. That's the point of this YouTube channel. My plan at the moment is to host weekly live-streamed philosophy hours, which will involve reading and discussion of a philosophical text. I started a couple of weeks ago with Thomas Nagel's essay, The Absurd. I've decided recently to return to Michel de Certeau for a second and somewhat deeper exploration. Depending on how it goes, I may continue through his book, The Practice of Everyday Life, for a number of additional weeks. This video serves as a kind of introduction to that series of live streams on de Certeau. In the meantime, here's a little primer on how to read Michel de Certeau. De Certeau is difficult to read for at least 3 reasons. First, French philosophers often have a certain style that can feel simply impenetrable, especially at first go. De Certeau is no exception. I remember feeling simply at a loss the first time I tried to read Jacques Derrida, another French philosopher. But at some point I realized that, unlike many Anglophone philosophers, Derrida's top priority was not clarity or precision, not exactly. Derrida was playing with language, and this was not simply sloppy thinking. Playing with language was part of how Derrida was making a philosophical point. When I understood this, it helped me to feel less disoriented when reading Derrida. This approach has proved useful for reading de Certeau as well. Second, like Derrida, de Certeau's writing does not simply make an argument. It also seeks to perform its own argument. In other words, de Certeau doesn't just want to tell us about the practice of everyday life or about the difference between strategies and tactics. He wants to show us that difference in the very way he writes and in how his writing relates to his interlocutors. De Certeau's mode of writing is intended to be a tactic relative to the strategies of established academic discourse. I'll explain these terms later on, but for now, it's enough to know that if you find his writing hard to pin down, that's intentional. Recognizing that he is writing in a tactical mode rather than a strategic one can help us make sense of the fact that the ground of his argument always seems to be shifting. Third, I find it helpful to think of de Certeau's book, The Practice of Everyday Life, as structured around a series of analogies. It can feel disconcerting as one reads to jump from military strategy to linguistics, to aesthetics, to narrative theory, to urban walking. But once you see that de Certeau is trying to illuminate certain structural or analogical resemblances across different fields as a way of explicating a pattern, these moves can become less disorienting. In fact, these analogies are de Certeau's primary method of illuminating each phenomenon he considers. It is by holding up seemingly disparate concepts or activities and showing their structural similarities that de Certeau reveals new aspects of each. A foundational element in de Certeau's series of analogies is the distinction between speech, parole, and language, Langue, originally developed by Ferdinand de Saussure, one of the founders of modern linguistics. Language is the rules and the structure of a language, or the abstract system of signs that make up a language. It is the structure one might find elaborated in a written grammar or study of a specific language, or in a dictionary that describes the meaning of each word in the language. Speech, on the other hand, is the way that individual users interact with the abstract system of language. If a language can, in theory, be identified as a fixed, abstract structure, speech is ever-shifting. Users can follow the established abstract structure of a language, or they can crisscross it, developing their own routes through and around the fixed structure of the language, like pedestrians exploring a city. De Certeau's book uses the idea of speech as a metaphor or analogy for exploring a whole range of other phenomena. He explains that speech, or enunciation, quote, is the subject of our study. We privilege the act of speaking. According to that point of view, speaking operates within the field of a linguistic system. It effects an appropriation or reappropriation of language by its speakers. It establishes a present relative to a time and place, and it posits a contract with the other, the interlocutor, in a network of places and relations. These four characteristics of the speech act can be found in many other practices: walking, cooking, etc. And that's from page 13 of the introduction to his book. The other foundational distinction in de Certeau's thought is that between place and time. If place is analogous to language, time is analogous to speech or enunciation. Time is the ever-changing, impermanent, everyday use of place. Place is fixed. It represents a series of fixed possibilities, just like language represents a series of abstract, fixed possibilities. Time, like speech, is the fluid, unpredictable, and irreducible way that such possibilities are made use of, perhaps even violated or subverted. Drawing on these two fundamental distinctions, de Certeau develops a third distinction between strategy and tactics. Strategy is that way of being or acting which takes for granted a proper place with a fixed set of possibilities. Strategy is the mode of military commanders with large armies and established procedures, of bureaucrats and managers, of administrators and law enforcement. Strategy is analogous to language, with its set of fixed, abstract, symbolic, and structured relationships. Tactics, on the other hand, are the mode specific to rebels, guerrilla fighters and terrorists, graffiti artists and anarchists. Tactics have no place of their own, but must use time to work on the terrain of strategy. Tactics are like speech, or enunciation, which interacts with the abstract, symbolic structure of language, but puts it to its own discrete, subversive objectives in specific times and circumstances. My original video on tactics explains the idea in a little more detail, as does my first live stream, so you can go there if you'd like to learn more. But hopefully, this setup gives you enough information to get started.